Welcome, gentlemen. If you have lost track of time, today is Thursday, and what we're going over today, after going through the melee DPS and then the tanks, we are going over the healers. How are their double legendary combos looking for 9.2? Are we going to see some new healers rise and create a new meta? Are the currently strongest healers also looking like they are going to be the one to get the best possible legendary combos and make it even worse? That's what we are here to find out. What we are also going to take a look at when we have to gauge the power of this double legendary combo is if possibly the tier set, the newly announced tier sets in 9.2 are going to play or not a role in the powers, because there are, as we have seen before with the melee DPS and the tanks, there are going to be some tier sets that might benefit certain legendaries. They might make it more valuable to pick them up and use them as a combo with a different one, so tier sets might play a role. We will mention them whenever they do, but for the moment we're gonna go once again from the bottom one, from the most disappointing one, the ones that don't look as great, all the way up to the top. Now, when we go over and look at healers, there is something we have to point out before we go and delve into each spec. Healers are actually in a pretty good situation as far as Covenant legendaries are concerned. As a matter of fact, pretty much all of them, except for one, and even that one isn't that bad. All the other ones are actually going to get some pretty nice synergy with their Covenant legendary options. This is a stark contrast with what we have seen for the tanks, where most of them actually aren't really going to have that much synergy with the other legendary. They're not even going to have that much synergy with their tier set bonuses, so they look rather disappointing. The healers are pretty much the opposite. So I mentioned one of them not being that great, pretty much the worst one, and still being quite nice. That one is Holy Priest. So it's not that good because Holy Priest is currently at the bottom of the rankings. If you look at the raids, if you look at Mythic Plus, it's usually the same thing. Holy Priest has amazing HPS if you can let him do his thing, but outside of that they lack in many other areas. Their damage, their utility, their big strong cooldowns you can use in a raid are still things they lack, and unfortunately it's not that this double legendary feature is going to fix any of these problems. So that's sad for priests, for Holy Priests at least. So the problem with Holy Priest. The first problem is that they pretty much only have one legendary they can use reliably and consistently, which is Flesh Concentration. That is their standout, very good and very effective legendary. This already means they're going to be locked in using the Covenant legendary of their choice without really having any wiggle room, because they have to use Flesh Concentration. It's just too good. So we also mentioned multiple times how Holy Priest is actually the most variable of healers and even of most other specs when it comes to choosing their Covenant. They have been hopping around multiple Covenants very often. So if we had to go by trying to look at the currently most used Covenants for Holy Priest, it would likely have to be Kyrian or Nightfae. I'm gonna just discount Nightfae because I'm pretty sure that's just a cuck priests playing with their fairies, trying to buff up their DPS for just padding the meters in red encounters. Let's just assume they will be staying Kyrian. Perhaps even Necrolord is a more likely result when it comes to 9.2 options for Holy Priest. So they would have to go and pick up the synergy with Boon of the Ascended for Kyrian, which is Sphere's Harmony. That is, we will see what I mean when we talk about Discipline. Discipline can get a lot of value out of Sphere's Harmony and for Boon of the Ascended, while Holy Priest not nearly as much. It's sort of like something they are forced to use, of course, because that's the only Covenant legendary you have available if you're playing Kyrian, but it's not really as synergistic for Holy Priest than it is for Discipline. Discipline gains value actually from doing damage. They gain value from that type of playstyle, while Holy Priest doesn't really. And even the cooldown reduction of Boon of the Ascended, Discipline Priest has it very valuable because you can try to make it line up with Spirit Shell, use your big ramp more often. What great synergy would the cooldown reduction have for a Holy Priest when they use Boon of the Ascended? What are they pairing it up with? That's kind of the problem with Holy. They do have a very strong mainstay legendary with Flesh Concentration, but the Covenant specific one is isn't really giving them anything. And then we go and look at their synergy with tier set bonuses, and also there is nothing there. It's just further synergy with increasing the effectiveness of their holy wards, as well as reducing the cooldown even more of their holy wards, which is something they already have multiple ways to do that for. So the current state for Holy Priest isn't that exciting. It's, you know, the weakest one, as we pointed out, for all of the healers at the moment. Now, following up is going to be a big surprise, because we went over the melee DPS and we pointed out Retribution Paladin being a standout pick because of their Divine Resonance, very powerful Kyrian legendary. Then we moved over to tanks. And what happened there is that Prot Paladin was also in a very good state, because guess what? They too can use Divine Resonance very well. So it's gonna come as a surprise, or maybe not too much, that when we move over to healers, there is one spec in the Paladin class that doesn't really go for Kyrian anymore, and that's Holy Paladin. Because Holy Paladin is now Ventier, because of the power of Ashen Hallow as a very powerful cooldown, especially when it comes to damage. Not just the damage itself, but the healing it does, allowing you to continue to do damage for longer, without having to worry too much about the HP state of your group or of your raid. The problem, when you look over Ventier, is that if you play Ventier, you are then forced to play with the Ventier legendary, which is Radiant Embers. And this legendary is... So, okay, this legendary is not too good. It's certainly going to be a help, or just fine in raid encounters. You can just drop this down and it's gonna last for 45 seconds instead of 30. It's already kind of a problem, because your wings is not lasting as much as your Ashen Hallow, so it's not that your power increase from Ashen Hallow is going to be that much increased anyways. But I guess it can still be functioning in raid encounters. Again, you would certainly want other type of combos as a Holy Paladin to be able to use in raids. Nowadays, Holy Paladin has moved to Marad's Dying Breath as a possible build in raids. They would totally like it if they could also use what they were using before and what they are using sometimes now, which is the Med Paragon in raids, to make your wings even longer, for example. Perhaps even pair that Med Paragon Wings extension with Vanguard's Momentum to give you one extra charge of Hammer of Wrath and 12% more holy damage. That could also work very well, so they would likely go for those picks if they could. Now that they can't, they have to use this one. It would still be kind of okay in raids. The bigger issue is going to be in Mythic Plus, because Blizzard added an extra utility, I guess QOL, to the Mythic Plus version of a Paladin, which is the fact that when you leave the area, it's going to get increased cooldown reduction, up to 50% of its original 4-minute cooldown. And this is where it's a bigger issue in Mythic Plus. I guess it can still have most of its power if you were planning on using Ashen Hallow on Tyrannical Weeks on bosses. It would likely still have the same effect as if you were using it in the raid, sure. But outside of that, when you're starting to look at big trash pools, which is where Ashen Hallow got its name for being a super strong ability, that's where it loses a little bit more of the value. A pool lasting for 45 seconds where you need all-out damage is much less likely in Mythic Plus, which would mean pretty much the main benefit would be some 30, perhaps even 40-second cooldown cut of your Ashen Hallow in Mythic Plus. So while not being a terrible pick for Holy Paladin, it's certainly not the best you could go for as a Paladin, and even then, as I pointed out, there are some quite other better choices that the other healers are going to have, so that's why Holy Paladin ends in here. What looks like to be very low, but it's not as bad as if it was, for example, the melee DPS being this low. Because right as we go after Holy Paladin, we start already seeing some better synergy and some better combos you will be able to use, starting with Discipline Priest. So Discipline Priest had a dream once this legendary was announced, once Sphere's Harmony was announced. It already looked like a possible good option simply because it had the cooldown reduction attached to it. The fact that you could reduce Boon of the Ascended by up to 60 seconds. What made this even better is the fact that this is Kyrian, and then they announced the last notable passive of Mechanicus, the one that can further reduce the cooldown to your Covenant ability. This started, showing up some possible situations in which you could be able to gain massive benefit from your Spirit Shell or Evangelism. Both of these talents have a 90-second cooldown, and Boon of the Ascended has a 3-minute cooldown, a 180-second cooldown, so twice as much. This created a situation where Discipline Priest would move between small ramp and big ramp. The small ramp was the one without Boon of the Ascended, because it had a 3-minute cooldown, and the big ramp was the one with Spirit Shell and Boon of the Ascended, but they had to alternate them, because they simply couldn't make the cooldowns match. So with Sphere's Harmony being released, you had the possibility between the Kyrian passive of Mechanicus and the Kyrian passive of this legendary to bring the cooldown of Boon of the Ascended to the same level of Spirit Shell, so that now you could basically have constantly a big ramp. This was made harder, let's just say, to maintain, because getting to the max stacks of this legendary was already kind of tough. Plus, the Mechanicus passive works in the number of enemies you are hitting, which makes it much harder to work in raid encounters. This is why Sphere's Harmony is much more used in Mythic Plus, because you can more constantly make sure that you are hitting multiple enemies with your abilities, therefore making sure that your Mechanicus max cooldown of 60 seconds is going to gain max value, as well as this legendary's effect of the 60-second cooldown is much easier to ramp up in Mythic Plus Trash Pool, so it's much easier to use in Mythic Plus, but in raid encounters they would still go for Clarity of Mind, since Clarity of Mind, simply put, was just too good, too effective in raid encounters. Not to mention giving you a very prized mana discount in raid encounters. Discipline Priest is very, very mana hungry in raid encounters, so this was very, very crucial to them. Now that we are hitting 9.2, Discipline Priests that are very likely still going to remain Kyrian are going to have the option of using Sphere's Harmony together with Clarity of Mind. This is going to make it much stronger. This is going to make it quite good in Mythic Plus. It's not really needed for Discipline Priests to use Clarity of Mind in Mythic Plus. Actually, it's more likely they will go for something else, but in raid encounters they will be able to use both of those together. It is unlikely they will be able to bring down Boon of the Ascended to 1.5 minutes to make it match with Spirit Shell, but it is possible that they will be able to bring it down to 1 minute 50, 1 minute 55-ish, which would mean they would have the option to use Spirit Shell every 2 minutes, but make it constantly a big ramp, a massive shield, as opposed to using it every 1.5 minutes, but having to go for a weak one, a smaller one, and then the big one if it can be used with Boon of the Ascended. So these couple of combos of Discipline Priest are pretty nice. It is always a nice addition. It's always better, as we pointed out before multiple times, for a class and a spec to have their best legendary be the Covenant legendary. Since you are forced to use a Covenant legendary, this is going to allow you much more options and choice for you to choose a different one. So Discipline Priest is looking quite nice. Even then, that's not enough to make it in the top 3 of the healers, so they are the 4th one in this list, because above them, who we have is Restoration Shaman. Now, it's pretty interesting that we just went over the 3 most popular and most played specs in raid encounters, as well as the 2 most popular ones in Mythic Plus: Restoration Shaman, Holy Paladin, and Discipline Priest. And we still have 2 more healers to go. So, as far as hopes that some other healers will become stronger in the next patch, this is not looking too bad, because Restoration Shaman is the 3rd healer from the top, because they have a very strong, a very powerful, to the point that very likely is going to be nerfed, synergy when it comes to Mythic Plus, but when it comes to the raid, it's weaker. You know, it's not as impressive, which is why they don't make it further than this. So their impressive synergy, their strong synergy, is with their Covenant legendary. Of course, when your Covenant legendary is your best in slot, you are bound to have some nice possible synergy. In the case of Shaman and Mythic Plus, that is Raging Vesper Vortex. That is the exodus of Shamans who went from Necrolord, because they were raiding, over to Kyrian to do Mythic Plus. Raging Vesper Vortex allows you even more damage as a healer in Mythic Plus. On top of that, while you do damage, you're also healing. This is a massive weakness of Restoration Shaman, the fact that they can do damage, but they have to do damage while not being able to heal. They're not like a Holy Paladin, they're not like a Mistweaver Monk, or even a Discipline Priest, where they can continue healing as they do damage. Shamans never quite had that option, except for using huge cooldowns like Healing Tide Totem, for example. But with this totem, totem, this Vesper totem empowered by the Raging Vesper Vortex legendary, it does allow them not only to do heavy damage in trash pools, particularly in AoE, but also to continue healing as they do damage, which is very good for Shamans because it shortens a pretty big weakness that they had in Mythic Plus keys. What makes this legendary even more obscene is that being a Covenant legendary, Shaman can now choose amongst all of the other legendaries they have to make it as good as possible in Mythic Plus. In this case, that's gonna be Deep Tremor Stone. They can now play with the Raging Vesper Vortex damage legendary paired together with the Earthquake attached to your Earth Elemental legendary. This is going to be very powerful. It's going to be very powerful in Mythic Plus trash packs to the point that it might even be overkill. It might likely be more sustainable and better for consistent damage in boss encounters, for example. So now they have the Raging Vesper Vortex for DPS in Mythic Plus trash pools, and then they have Deep Tremor Stone for extra passive damage on boss fights. This is a very powerful combo. The reason why they don't make it further than third spot as healer is because when it comes to raid encounters, this is a little bit weaker because Raging Vesper Vortex is not that great in raid encounters. You can go over Necrolord, which Shaman already is, and the problem is that Necrolord's legendary is likely the weakest one for Restoration Shaman in raids. You don't really care about that. You don't really care about that boost of haste too much. Perhaps you can go Seeds of Rampant Growth for your cooldown reduction on your Healing Tide totem if you can make it available more often in an encounter, but that's pretty niche and unlikely. You can just go for Elemental Conduit as a Ventir for better burst healing after big hits of a raid boss, but all of these options have their pros and their cons. They're not excellent either one, which means the combination with their Primal Tide Core, their standard normal legendary for raid encounters, is not that great. There isn't too much synergy there. Talking about tier sets, it's not that the tier sets are helping Shaman either. There is an entire fetish Blizzard is going to go for Shamans in 9.2, which is going to be around Chain Heal. So, not really too much there for synergy and for combinations of legendaries, so that's why they stop in third place. Fantastic synergy for Mythic Plus, worth of first place, but pretty poor raid synergy, which is why they don't go further than this. Who is going further than this are the last two specs, which are Mistweaver Monk and Restoration Druid. Funny, as we pointed out, these are not particularly popular right now. They are in fact amongst the least popular when it comes to competitive content, both Mythic Plus and raid encounters. So, the second place is going to be taken up by Restoration Druid. We have now gone through this already for Guardian. We have gone through this for Feral as well, because Restoration also plays Night Fae. So guess what? It's gonna be the same. The Restoration Druid, just like Feral, has a best legendary, which is Celestial Spirits, which is the Covenant ability legendary. So, of course, it's going to be great for them to be able to use two, because since they are already using the Covenant legendary, which has replaced the two previous better legendaries for Mythic Plus and for raid encounters, what they can do in 9.2 is use them together. They can go back to use Visions of Unending Growth for raid encounters for the AIDS spreading of rejuvenation, and they can go back to using Verdant Infusion in Mythic Plus together with Celestial Spirits. What is even better for Druid, which might have made them tip over the first spot, is the fact that the tier set, the set bonuses of Druid for 9.2 as Restoration are going to be centered around Swiftman, which is the ability buffed by Verdant Infusion. So you do have synergy, you do have some complementary actions made by the tier sets together with this legendary. This is why Druid finishes up and above most of the other healers, because of the great synergy that legendaries can have, plus the extra bonus of having good synergy with its tier sets. Who is finishing first, however, is Mistweaver Monk. Now, to be fair, this is similar to what we went over the melee DPS. This is more likely a tie, just like it was between Feral and Retribution. This one between Mistweaver and Restoration Druid is more like a tie. At this point, I guess you already know the reason why. They are the top because their best in slot legendary is the Covenant legendary of Ventir. Fallen Order used to be an absolute joke crash of a Covenant ability. In the constant search of Blizzard to balance the Covenant abilities, they have continued to buff this Ventir ability, and then they added a pretty strong Covenant legendary on top of it, to the point that it became quite valuable for Mistweaver monks. So now most of them are using Sinister Teachings, the legendary for Ventier. And the ability itself is quite, out of control in terms of effectiveness for Mistweaver. It is actually most of their healing compared to all of their other abilities. Not to mention having a very high uptime thanks to the Sinister Teachings effect. The ability by itself only has a 24-second duration on a 3-minute cooldown, but this legendary gives you a 5-second cooldown reduction whenever you crit when one of these Adepts of the Fallen Order are active. So this makes your ability, instead of having a 180 seconds, a 3-minute cooldown, just a 60-second cooldown. It basically gives it a 50% uptime active throughout the fight, throughout the encounter. This is very, very powerful. This is very good because now it means that Mistweavers can just add on top of their best in slot legendary whatever they want next. What they used before this legendary was Ancient Teachings of the Monastery, so their fist weaving help for Mistweaver Monk, which is already going to be a pretty nice effectiveness for Mistweaver. What is also slightly good is the fact that their 2-piece set bonus is buffing Essence Font, which is already your second strongest ability right after your Fallen Order Covenant ability, so it's pretty nice for you. The 4-piece set bonus is pretty disappointing, but I guess we can't ask for that much for Mistweavers. And all in all, they end up being the one that has the best looking set of combo of possible legendaries for healers. It is nice, as we pointed out, it is nice because they were amongst the low end, amongst the bottom performers of healers. They seem to have the same problem, which is why not too many people are too positive, I guess optimistic towards Mistweaver, because they already have very high HPS. If you go for fights like Guardian of the First Ones, which is a pure HPS fight, you can see easily how well Mistweaver monks can do in terms of HPS. They are doing the best out of all healers, which is why people are a little bit hesitant to believe in the Mistweaver monk, because what they think it needs is other things other than increasing their HPS. They think it needs perhaps more damage, perhaps stronger raid cooldowns that can be used, etc., which is something that they are lacking right now. And it's not that this legendary combo is going to bring anything that is going to help them with these problems, but if we are purely looking at the synergy that we might have in 9.2 as far as how well these legendaries are going to work together for Mistweaver, then they are the best looking ones out of all the healers. So now that we have looked at all of the healers, we have the interesting situation that we have the 3 currently best healers not really being the first in lines in terms of great options. We do have the very nice one for Shaman, but that's more limited to Mythic Plus. We have the sort of weird one for Holy Paladin that might or might not work that well, and then the surprise that 2 of the least played and the least performing healers seem to have gotten the best synergy so far as 9.2 is concerned. So once again, let me guys know what you think about this, about your excitement when it comes to these possible options if you're playing a healer, as well as whether or not you think there is some other big brain possible combination when it comes to the healer picks in 9.2. For the moment, however, we can stop here. Thank you as usual for watching the video. If you want to continue supporting the channel, you can leave a like on the video, you can comment down below, as well as you can subscribe to the channel. If you are a healer, if you have played a healer in the last 60 days, or if you are considering playing a healer for 9.2 as well. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, don't you hate it? Don't you hate it when you wake up and just a few hours later you are somehow sleepy again?